recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Castle of Horror interview segment where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre world. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels. This week we're talking to Josh Viola about the new anthology, Nightmares Unhinged, 20 Tales of Terror from Hex Publishers. Kirkus Reviews, all right, I looked this up. This is doing really well. Kirkus Reviews said, all 20 stories disconcerting in their own ways, leave impressions individually as well as collectively, a slew of gloriously disturbing, well-told tales to unnerve readers. Nightmares Unhinged was the winner of the fiction horror category and finalist in the fiction anthologies category from the 2015 USA Best Book Awards. Find it at hexpublishers.com or various retailers. With me is Josh Viola. He's an author, artist, video game developer. 2016, his new book, Cyber World, an anthology co-edited by Hugo Award winner Jason Heller, comes out. More anthologies coming in 2017. And his claim to fame is a Transmedia franchise, which he's going to talk about a little bit about what that is. The Bane of Yoto. So that's books and various forms of media that's received more than a dozen literary awards. So, Josh, you're here to talk about your stuff and about Nightmares Unhinged, this new anthology, which is very exciting. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I got my hands on this, and I've been reading it, and it's really brought a smile to my face as I was making my way through. So,
great.
I wanted to ask you about Nightmares Unhinged. You've got 20 stories in the book. This is brand new, and this came out this summer. Is that right?
September 9th, I believe. Yeah.
Very, very new. So it came out this fall. And okay. And like I say, it's a horror anthology. And what I wanted to ask you about is the genre of horror anthologies. Like, is that because when I think about it, I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. Because when I think of horror anthologies, those are some of my favorite books, like of my entire childhood. You know, things like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, or all those various collections of short stories that you would get in the library. You know, like Tales from the Crypt, and which was short stories based on the movie and stuff like that. So how did you wind up in that genre, and tell me a little bit about your feelings about the genre?
Well, I'm a horror fan all around, and that's more than just literature. That's comic books, video games, movies, and it's nothing that I've never approached really in my own creative process before. So, and it's always something that I've wanted to do. Primarily, I've done science fiction and fantasy. So, when I decided to put Hex together, that was immediately I knew I was going to jump into that genre. So, just as a fan, I wanted to play around with it a little bit. But it's popular, especially right now. Outside of the book world, in film, especially in indie film, we're seeing horror just really come on strong, and it's being received well, and it's doing well. So everything that I do in prose, I think about cinematically, and I wanted to play with it. And thankfully too, I don't know if you saw this, but one of the short stories in Nightmares Unhinged just got optioned for film by Paul Campion out of the UK. So we're going to start, I believe, filming starts next summer. So
which story was that?
The Librarian.
The Librarian.
Yes.
No, actually, that's a really interesting one, and very neat. And it's such a lovely story. That one, by the way, The Librarian is about this girl who works in a library, and it's a sort of an old-fashioned library where they're still using paper cards and a lot of handwritten stuff. So either the story is about an old-fashioned library in a modern world, or the story takes place sometime in like the late 1980s, and there's this mystery involving a patron who has this ritual of checking out and returning the same books over and over and over again without ever saying a word, which is an almost Melville-like setup, and that's really great. It's a cool story. It really is. I'm glad to hear that.
That one.
Yeah.
Well, part of that story in particular doesn't, it has horror tropes that are there, but it's not really a horrific story. And like you said, there's a mystery element, and also I would hope that readers would come away with it with kind of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer sort of charm and sense of humor as well. But part of the goal with Nightmares Unhinged was to make sure it's like a mixtape. It's like a best of everything that you like, and that doesn't have to all be, you know, hardcore horror. It can have humor elements, lighter elements, and but still fit within that genre. And that was a big task and goal on my end, was to make sure that we tried to do that.
So how does it vary in this collection? I mean, it seems to me there are some of the stories are very short. Some go on kind of long. I mean, I'm curious how you go about kind of collecting stories for a particular collection. I mean, I don't know anything about the process for this, so tell me a little bit about how that gets put together.
Well, it's certainly going to be different with the next anthologies that I've got coming out, but we're invite only. So rather than I didn't want to sort through, and just being 100% frank here, I didn't want to sort through a vast amount of stories by, you know, unknowns, as bad as that sounds. I wanted to have notable writers that have a reputation, that know what they're doing, that produce quality work. So I reached out to them. That was the goal, was to reach out to these notables. And I had a number. You know, I knew that I wanted to have a specific amount of stories in the book and a specific word count. So basically it was reaching out to those that I was interested in, and luckily, you know, the good majority of them said yes. So then diving into the theme and what we wanted to accomplish with the book, that varied as far as, you know, here's the overall theme. I want to play with a horrific concept of, you know, nightmares. What is a nightmare to the writer, to the author, in some sort of setting? And they played with it. So, and we did definitely have there are some stories that are substantially shorter than others. But that was actually what made it fun, was balancing how, if you read straight through the book, you know, a lot of care was put into what story follows what. You know, I don't want to start off with all of the incredibly long stories and then end it with all of the short stories. I want to mix it up so you're giving the reader some breathing room, and I also want to have a darker story followed up by a lighter story. So, so it was really, that was actually the hardest part of the book, was just determining the order.
I'll bet. I mean, if you think about like those, you know, great old anthologies, like I'm a sucker for, Alan Norton used to put out these anthologies that I would get in paperback when I was a kid. At that point, these anthologies were like 20 or 30 years old. But, you know, it was exactly the same way. You'd have these, you know, some great thing by Max Brand, and then a 2-pager from somebody, and then something that went really long. And it plays the same way as like a horror anthology movie, where because the book is demanding something of you, which is that it's demanding that you reset your brain and go ahead and accept a new world, new characters. Okay, that thing I just watched is over. Now here's a new one. It's you know, you're trying to make that transition kind of, I don't know if it's possible to make it easy, but you can at least make it welcoming. You know, make it sort of novel for you to switch it around. Do you have any favorites, by the way? And first of all, both I may not. I could ask you to add favorites of this particular collection, so you can think about like what people can look for. But if you want to answer, if you don't want to answer that, you don't have to. But I'm curious if you, you know, I mentioned like I don't know, scary stories to tell in the dark. But did you have any favorites coming up that you kind of wanted to be a part of that tradition?
Well, I'll answer both of those. So my favorites in Nightmares Unhinged, and I mean this sincerely, you know, as the curator, as somebody putting it together, I do like all of the stories that are in the book. I think that they're all done very well. And I remember, you know, back in just, I don't even remember where I heard it, to be honest with you, but just in the process of putting an anthology together, it's just common knowledge that you start with your second best story and you end with your best story. And I tried to follow that, you know. So Gary Jonas's Taking the Dare is my personal favorite story in the book.
Wow.
And, you know, I there are a lot of reasons why it's a favorite of mine, and you know,
Tell me about it, because I haven't read that one yet. I've read a lot of the books in this, the stories in this collection, but I haven't read Taking the Dare yet.
Yeah, I think the characters and the setting that he's got and just the interactions, the character development is fantastic for such a short story. And really, it's less to do with the horror elements and more to do with the characters, which is the heart of all stories anyhow. And it has a very retro kind of. I'm a big fan of the 70s and 80s and pop culture and just the Spielberg-esque kind of feel that he presents in the story is fantastic. So
that's something that you also see in The Projectionist in this collection by that one I'm looking. It says by Jason Heller. So that one is this brilliant thing. He's it's a very strange tale of a mysterious projectionist in an old strip mall movie theater, which is described so perfectly. The sort of ugly parking lot universe of the strip mall movie theater, and it's a really golden period. It's the summer of 1982, I think, the summer when Blade Runner and a bunch of other great stuff came out, and there's magic in those movies playing at that particular time, and a weird elegy for the way that the art world and the movie world is moving on. That's a fascinating story and really cool. I have a question. when one of your writers responds to you reach out and you go, "Hey, Jason Heller, give me a story." Do they write you back and go, "Yeah, no, I got something. It's going to be about this," or do they just go, "Oh, sure. Well, when do you want it?" And you go July 1, and they just send you a story on July 1. I mean, how does that work?
Well, there are some writers that are, and again, they were all fantastic to work with, but there are some writers that are much more. They pay attention to the schedule a little bit more than others. There were a few at Shakedown a few times, so. But life happens, and that makes sense. But Jean Stein, her story is the only story in the book that is a reprint. All the others are original for the anthology, and originality is something that clearly we want. The more specific the theme, the more original you're going to get. I'm assuming that some writers, and I know as a writer myself, you've got some of your stories in the trunk that didn't necessarily make it in a previous anthology, and you hope that you'll sell it to another anthology. So
sure,
recycle those if they haven't been published. And I can say without a doubt that I know a good chunk of the stories in Nightmares were written originally specifically for the book, but there are others that I'm not 100% sure on. But it depends on how strict your theme is. I know with the anthologies that we have going forward for Cyberworld and Blood Business, there's a much more strict theme behind it. So there are enough requirements for seeing those original stories. But everybody has their own process, and some like Stephen Graham Jones, the guy's an animal. I mean, he can whip something out very, very quickly, and it's of incredible quality. It's insane. Mm-hmm. And then there are guys
that
like
is a good story. He does one called "The Man Who Killed Texas," and it reminds me a lot of The Road. That's an incredible story. Very touching, very sort of grim, and well written. Let me ask you something. What makes a good or you can answer what makes it bad. I'm curious. Obviously, short fiction is a really horror works well in short fiction. What makes a good short horror story, and what are pitfalls that writers can? If a writer's listening to the show, and they often do because we interview writers, and so writers are interested. What's a pitfall when trying to write a short story, a horror story? Since you've read thousands of them as an editor, what do you warn people not to do?
Well,
at least in your head. You may never have warned them out loud. Go ahead.
What I honestly, for me, it doesn't matter if it's horror or if it's another genre. I am a big fan of quality, risk-taking stories. So I'm looking at the mechanics more than anything, as far as what the writer is doing. And your general audience, that if they don't write, if they aren't familiar with that process, they don't understand those mechanics. So I want to make sure that, again, and that's why I reached out to the notables, is they already know that process. So I don't have to worry too much about that. The mechanics are in place. They're there. The writing quality is good. But what I'm looking for are writers that like to take risks and do something that is completely different and that's not mainstream. And I hope that, we accomplish that with the book, with the stories that we've got. It's indie, but it's quality indie. It's commercial polish with a risk-taking flair as far as the content of the stories. But I mean, ultimately, it has to be about a character overcoming some sort of, there needs to be a problem that has to be solved. And, horror in particular is interpreted very, very differently by different people. Stephen Graham Jones, just since we were talking about that, his is very much a horror story. There is a horrific situation, but it doesn't have speculative elements. It doesn't have, ghosts or creatures or serial killers. He's dealing with the horror of a potentially very realistic situation that very well could occur. So
it's a horror because it's nightmarish, honestly. I mean, just that it's a horrible scene that if you were living it, you would want to wake up from.
Right.
That's so reading through all of these are very, very well done. But I was thinking, one of the pitfalls with writing short fiction is that, especially if you're a novelist, there's this constant tug to try to figure out, like, there's this feeling that you're cutting everything too short, or a lot of novelists, I think, have a tendency to write short stories that really actually appear to be just a couple chapters from a novel they haven't finished yet.
That certainly is the case to some extent. But with a chapter from a novel, you still, even if it's short fiction, even if it's 3,000 words or 1,500 words or 7,000, whatever the limit is, depending on the anthology, you still have to come around full circle. You still have to, you should tell some sort of a story that has a beginning, middle, and end for what's happening there. And for me, somebody who my debut novel was 120,000 words. I'm currently working on another novel myself that's probably going to land around 90,000 words. Short fiction was very frightening for me personally as a writer because of that. It's like, man, 3,000 words is not enough. And now that I've done so many of them in the last couple of years, I prefer short fiction. I'm more comfortable with it now. I'd rather do that because I think less is more, and when you're forced to tighten your prose and to really determine what's important and what's fluff, short fiction helps, at least from a writing standpoint.
No, absolutely. Certainly, it's an exercise that I think you should try. To be honest, I haven't tried screwing around with short fiction in many, many, many years. So I'd be very, very intimidated by it right now. I haven't written anything that's not novel length in a long time. I mean, and it just strikes me as fascinating. But I love to read them. I think when it comes to horror, I probably enjoy reading short stories, short horror fiction, even more than novels, which is funny. Except for that for my just relaxing reading, that's just been a go-to forever. And all the best do it from people you've never heard of to even Stephen King just released another short story collection. So it remains this really, really important forum for us as a culture. Nightmares Unhinged. You found at Hex Publishers, is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's Hex's.
And this is your first release from that publisher.
First big release. I did release Luna 1, which is essentially a novella, but didn't put much press behind that. But yeah, Nightmares is our first big release.
So how did you go about getting attention from? I mean, it seems to me that that's just a lot to pull off, to create to found a publisher, to create new work. How do you get attention from various awards and from Kirkus and enough to get a good review and all of that? I mean, that just seems like a huge amount to bite off.
Well, it certainly was, and I'm quite proud, honestly, of everything we accomplished. Really, in under a year, once the book hit the shelves. But I've done a lot on my own. You know, my background is in marketing. I've done quite a bit in marketing, and I've also worked in multimedia. You know, my experience in video games, and it was really just a combination of everything I've learned from everything I've done, and trying to do it right and efficiently. So, and yeah, I hired a publicist, and we worked immediately. January of 2015, we started pushing Nightmares Unhinged very slowly and let it trickle down up until the release. But you know, we did some very interesting marketing techniques. I don't know if you saw the trailer that we put together for the book, but again, my background is animation, video games, and so I made use of that. I have my own studio where I have employees, and we put together an animated trailer that we had playing in AMC theaters and the Alamo Craft House, and 100% custom, very, very well done. And then we also did a PlayStation 4 dynamic theme, which is basically an advertisement for the book that users can install to have as like an animated background. So we repurposed art assets from the trailer for that, and that has done incredibly well. It was released October 1st, and Sony featured it, and we've had, you know, it sells for $3 a piece, and I've already, in just over a month's time, I've covered the entire production of Nightmares Unhinged through the PlayStation theme alone.
Outstanding. Outstanding.
Yeah, so it's and yeah,
congratulations.
So
that's what you mean when you talk about transmedia promotion, right? Is that where you're finding all of these different ways to touch the customer and make them aware of this one product, which is the book, but also this concept, this world that you're bringing to them.
Yeah,
Pretty
I
cool.
mean, transmedia is all about, you know, exactly, it's transcending different types of media to promote and tell the same story, or a story within a specific universe and world. And I find that fun to try to tackle and play with, and I have the ability to do a little bit more than your average writer, you know, so I really enjoy it. You know, The Bane of Yodo, my debut novel, it was released in paperback. You know, it was prose. It was a book, but we also worked with a video game company, and we did a 3D comic book app that we had over 300,000 installs, and it had a soundtrack by Cell Dweller, who's a major Hollywood musician. So we were transcending, you know, different forms of media there. And then my novel Black Star, which Cell Dweller hired me to write, he scored an album. So we had the book, and then you could purchase an instrumental soundtrack that went along with the book. And I'm currently working on a project that we'll be starting. I'm not going to announce the name yet just because I haven't finalized everything, but currently we're in the works of putting together a book, and then we'll also have a comic book release and a short animated film release. So
very cool.
It's just fun playing with different projects and different forms of media to tell a story.
Well, when you think about it, you're doing something very traditional, right? At the very basic, we're talking about fiction, horror fiction, short stories, same kind of thing that we've been doing for a long while. But you're bringing in, first of all, your own knowledge of marketing and so forth. But what you're bringing that to is all of these techniques that are new. I mean, in other words, if you had, let's say you had put together this collection of short stories in 1995 instead of 2015. So if you would put it out 20 years ago, most of what you were just talking about was not available at all. You had literally the only way to get people's attention and say, hey, look, this book exists, you should take a look at it, would be hopefully maybe you could get some papers or magazines to cover it, and you could carry advertising. And that's pretty much it. You know, there's no such thing as book trailers. There's generally, sometimes, I take that back, because there were some book trailers sometimes that would be advertised on television. But television is an almost impossible thing to afford. But everything you're talking about, social media, all that stuff, the PlayStation theme, all that stuff is new and recent, and it's so exciting that it's being used to promote fiction. I think that's really an accomplishment. It's pretty cool.
It's definitely neat, and obviously, like you said, it needs to be there to be made use of. But But the challenge is presenting it in a way that makes people interested. You know, there's also a lot of crap out there that saturates the market, and you know, so it's trying to find a way to make it stand out. That's the challenge.
So you're saying you can still do a really terrible book trailer.
Oh yeah,
and,
most of
and
them.
a really awful PlayStation team. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Wow. Well, okay. Well, I really appreciate you talking with us. The book is called Nightmares Unhinged. It is, I really love horror anthology fiction, and I've really enjoyed this one because it fits into that tradition, that scary stories to tell in the dark, but for grown-ups tradition that I love. And I'm really glad you took the time to speak with us. I was just, we were remarking before we started recording that there's a book club in Denver that's going to be discussing this book in like a week or so. And I'm so excited to like get together with other readers and like talk about this thing in some restaurant somewhere. There's something kind of scary and weird about the notion of actually attending to listen to figure out what somebody would be saying about your work.
I think it's great, and I'm very honored that they're doing that, and I'm happy. You know, the book was a Denver Post bestseller twice since it's come out, so I mean it's definitely resonating with those that are finding it, and I couldn't be happier. So it's great.
That is really fantastic. All right. Well, I really appreciate it. Josh Viola, thank you so much. We will look for, I want people to look for Nightmares Unhinged right now, which, again, they can find at hexpublishers.com, or they can find it at various retailers that you may usually go to for your book needs. And thank you very much, and we will hopefully talk to you again soon. Have a fantastic week.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye.